Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to a special Sunday edition of the Watchman Newscast. We are coming to you every day, 7 days a week, as this war continues between Israel and the terror group Hamas in Gaza. We usually come to you Monday through Friday with a weekend update mixed in, but now, again, 7 days a week. We have a lot of new subscribers over the past few days, so be sure, if you have not subscribed, to subscribe and click the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. Folks, the Middle East never sleeps, and neither do we. We want to be your one-stop shop on everything that is happening right now in the world's most pivotal and chaotic region. So let's get into it. A quick update. Number one, the latest news, the rockets continue to fall from Gaza, courtesy of Hamas. Ashdod and Ashkelon, two communities in southern Israel just north of the Gaza Strip on the Mediterranean coast, have been bombarded today, Sunday, May 16th, and alerts and sirens continue to sound throughout southern Israel right now. This followed a pretty heavy barrage against central Israel yesterday. A man in the Tel Aviv suburb of Ramat Gan was killed. Bottom line, the rockets continue, and the Israel Defense Forces in response are carrying out heavy and very effective airstrikes against Hamas targets, military, intelligence infrastructure throughout the Gaza Strip right now, including the targeting of Hamas leaders and military commanders. Just last night, Israel targeted the home of Yahya Sinwar. He's the leader of Hamas in Gaza. He lives in the southern city in Gaza of Khan Yunis. His home and the home of his brother, another Hamas operative, were both targeted. The IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, say, no surprise here, that these two homes were also the scene of a lot of Hamas business, to say the least. A big takeaway from the past few days, that tunnel network that we've told you about here on the Watchman Newscast, it's called the Metro. It no longer is open for business, as one IDF military member said today in an interview with the media. The Metro has been mostly destroyed, courtesy of the Israeli Air Force. It is an underground network of Hamas tunnels that stretched some 600 miles throughout Gaza. If you can imagine that, folks, a massive underground labyrinth where Hamas moved weapons and all sorts of illicit materials through and planned to use it in the next battle with Israel. Now, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, gave a speech today to the Israeli public. He said, this operation will continue probably for several more days. Folks, what Israel wants to do is get to the point where Hamas is decimated so that they cannot pose a serious threat to Israel anytime in the near future. But as we're seeing right now, the rockets continue to fall and fall, look, at a distance in places like Tel Aviv at an unprecedented rate. The Israeli military said today that rockets have never fallen this rapidly out of Gaza, or even in the 2006 war that Israel fought against Hezbollah in Lebanon. The sheer volume, hundreds of rockets. On Wednesday, for instance, Hamas fired at least 130 rockets in a 5-minute span. The Israel Defense Forces said today that that is unprecedented. It's a new level. So can Israel get to that deterrence point? That's what they are trying to do right now. Israeli officials, again, are saying this thing's going to last. Meanwhile, the world clearly wants a ceasefire. Hey, everyone would like to see the hostilities end and a ceasefire take effect. Unfortunately, Hamas and Islamic Jihad, two Iranian proxies, continue to fire rockets. More on Iran, some big news there in a second, but a quick update on yesterday's Saturday newscast. You can check it out in our archives. And a reminder, while you're there, subscribe. We talked about the IDF targeting this tower, this 12-story tower in Gaza. International media, Al Jazeera, the Associated Press, used this tower, as did Hamas. Hamas was essentially using these media outlets as human shields. So Israel gave an hour's notice, told these media outlets, hey, get out, we're coming in. And this tower was destroyed. Now, there were howls of outrage and international condemnation, but today, Israeli officials are saying, yes, Hamas operated inside this tower, and we provided a smoking gun to the Biden administration, to the United States, to prove it. We don't have the smoking gun yet. I look forward to hearing more. I have no doubt that Hamas was indeed operating inside this building because they have a long and horrific tradition, folks, of using innocent civilians as human shields. More on that in a second as well. So just a quick update there on that tower that fell. But as I said, the big takeaway today, the Iranian regime, two things to keep in mind. And again, the head of the snake behind this entire conflict sits in Tehran right now in the form of the Ayatollah and the Iranian regime. The head of Iran's Revolutionary Guards Corps Quds Force, that's an elite unit of their IRGC. He is the successor to the not-so-dearly departed terror master, Qasem Soleimani. Esmail Ghani is his name, and he had a very interesting phone call today with a Hamas leader, Ismail Haniyeh, who lives in Qatar, as a matter of fact. Pretty interesting, his geographical location. Qatar is a big problem. That's another story. But Ghani praised Haniyeh on this call, heaped praise upon him for the Hamas martyrdom and jihad operations. And he talked a bit about the perceived weaknesses of Israel in the view of the Iranian regime, and talked more about strategy and how Israel is encircled. Hey, folks, we've told you about the encirclement around Israel. We call it Iran's ring of fire, from Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza to Lebanon in the north in the form of Hezbollah, Syria, Hezbollah, Iran operating there as well. To the east, we have Iraqi Shia militias. To the far south, we have the Houthis in Yemen, all Iranian proxies. So we learned today that Iran is very actively supportive and involved in this campaign. Surprise, surprise, to the point that we also learned today the attack drones that Hamas is using alongside those rocket barrages are very, very similar, surprise, surprise, to the Iranian-supplied drones that the Houthis in Yemen are using against Saudi Arabia. Hint, hint, here's why. Because they are made in Iran and supplied to Hamas and the Houthis by the Iranian regime. So again, if you want to see an end to this conflict like we all do, the answer lies in Tehran. The Iranian regime could call off the wolves right now, say stop firing the rockets to Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, but they will not do that because, as I said yesterday, folks, this is a dry run of sorts for Iran, meaning they have larger plans for a larger conflict in their goal to wipe Israel off the map. They are very patient. They will wait until they feel the time is right. As a matter of fact, a few years ago, the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, wrote a book called Palestine, and he said that within 25 years, Israel will be destroyed. That was about 5 or 6 years ago when he wrote that, so you do the math. They have a long-term plan, is what I'm telling you, very strategic. Hezbollah is the central pillar of that plan. That's the crown jewel of all of Iran's proxies. As I've said this week, I believe that Iran is holding Hezbollah back and preserving them for a later engagement. Hey, anything can happen in today's Middle East. Expect the unexpected, but I see it as right now Hezbollah being held back again for that later, bigger battle that we've talked about here in the newscast. I call it the Great Northern War, which is coming. It's a question not of if, but when. Hezbollah armed to the teeth with at least 150,000 rockets and missiles pointed at every inch of Israel. We have news on that front. There are reports kind of confirming what I've been feeling throughout the week and sharing with you all, that Hezbollah likely will not get involved in this round of hostilities between Israel and Hamas. So very interesting. We see what is going on right now, that Iran is positioning assets around Israel. But again, this is the dry run. A last thing I wanted to mention, I'm going to glance at my laptop, by the way, here, which if you watch me here on a daily basis on the newscast, you know I just go. But there is so much going on that I do not want to miss anything. By the way, not our usual set today. We don't have all the bells and whistles and video that we would usually have because it is the weekend. And my editor, God bless him, actually gets a break on the weekend, which he richly deserves. But hey, again, content is king, and that is why you are here. Last thing to mention, of course, we want to get into some misperceptions, I guess the word would be, on casualties and occupation. Number one, Jeremy Corbyn, he's a leftist leader in Great Britain. He ran for prime minister last year. Thankfully, he was defeated soundly. It was actually 2019. He spoke at a pro-Palestinian rally yesterday, and he said the occupation must end, and pretty much said the occupation, quote unquote, so-called occupation, is why this is happening. Folks, Israel is not occupying Gaza. No Israelis have been in Gaza since 2005. Clearly, it's not because of the occupation. It's because Hamas wants to wipe Israel off the map. And we will do a deep dive. I promised yesterday, we're working on it, on the roots of how this latest blow up, this latest war, and it is a war, began between Hamas and Israel. Also, Islamic Jihad, can't forget them. Hamas's comrades in arms and former Iranian proxies. So enough about the occupation being the cause of this. There have been no Israelis in Gaza, which Hamas rules with an iron fist, in 16 years. So they're not occupied. The only occupier in Gaza who's tormenting the Palestinian people is Hamas, and by extension, the Iranian regime. Look no further than Tehran when we talk about the misery of the Palestinians living in Gaza, which brings us to casualties. Some 11 Israelis killed so far, including one soldier, since Monday. This has been going on for 6 days now. According to the Gaza Ministry of Information or Ministry of Health, which is Hamas, can you take what they say at face value? Over 170 Palestinians have been killed. The Israel Defense Forces says a good majority of them have been Hamas and Islamic Jihad fighters. Now, we can go all day. We get a lot of trolls on our YouTube comments, and people are saying they're talking about Palestinian casualties. And Israel's a terrorist. Israel's a terrorist state. And folks, here's the difference. Throughout every newscast, I think, we have said we are praying for the Palestinian people. We are praying that Hamas stops using Palestinians, innocent women, children, elderly, as human shields and placing rocket launchers intentionally in densely populated civilian areas. That's number one. Number two, we're praying that the rockets that Hamas is firing don't fall anywhere, but also not inside Gaza, where they have also, Hamas's own rockets have killed Palestinians over these past few days. We are always saying, hey, we're praying for the Palestinian people to get from under the jackboot of that wicked Hamas regime, and by extension, the Iranian regime. But the commenters I'm getting, thousands, hundreds, thousands, never once say, hey, we want this, we want peace, and we pray for Israeli civilians who've been killed too. It's basically, and pardon my French, F you. You are a terrorist supporter. Israel needs to be wiped off the map. They are terrorist dogs. And I'm quoting. This is literally the intellectual heft that is brought to the table in these so-called arguments that I'm getting on social media. I welcome the give and take, but you got to come with something a little more serious than screw you, Israel's a terrorist. How about some facts? I'm laying out facts for you every single day here on the Watchman YouTube channel, on the Watchman Newscast. Where are the facts? As Ronald Reagan, a great man, once said, facts are a stubborn thing. They were when he said it, I believe, in 1980, and they still are today in 2021. And it's tough to refute facts when all you have in return is profanity and emotion and threats. But that's what we're getting right now. I think it tells you something. Secondly, another great man, the prophet Isaiah, once said, woe to those who call evil good and good evil. Tell me we're not living in times like that, folks, right now. Hey, want to wrap up? Make sure I got everything I wanted to get to. Yes, I did. We mentioned everything. Hey, last thing to say, hey, follow us Facebook at Erick Stakelbeck, and also Twitter at Erick Stakelbeck, Instagram Erick.Stakelbeck. And again, make sure to subscribe here on our YouTube channel and click that notification bell. Very important, because every time a video is posted, updates on this conflict, you'll get an alert. Last thing to say, all roads lead to Jerusalem. This began in Jerusalem, this latest round of hostilities, and one day it will all end in Jerusalem. The prophet Zechariah, chapter 12, verse 2, is very clear about this. He says that Jerusalem, in the last days, will become a burdensome stone to all nations that surround it, and anyone, it will become a cup of trembling, he also says, and that anyone that comes against Jerusalem will be cut to pieces. Let's keep that in mind as we see these events playing off. God Almighty has given Jerusalem to the nation of Israel as its ancient and ancestral and eternal capital. And again, Facts are a stubborn thing. Thanks so much for joining us here today on the Watchman Newscast. Until tomorrow, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace.